found a photo in a book, and my life changed forever. I always thought that life's great tragedies arrived with a bang. A slammed door, a scream, an accident. But mine arrived silently, hidden between the pages of a book I hadn't opened for months. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The sky was so gray it seemed like a warning, although I didn't know it yet. I had finished my classes at school, and when I got home, I decided to look for a poem by Benedetti for my students. I opened the living room shelf and took out that heavy volume of poetry. When something slipped from between its pages and fell to the floor, it was a photograph. In the image, Andres, my husband of 8 years, was smiling. But it wasn't his usual smile. The one he gave me when we met after a long day. No, it was different. Lighter, more vibrant. Beside him, a woman with brown hair, golden skin, and a laugh I could almost hear, hugged him as if he were hers. The background was a beach, a perfect sunset, and the worst part, it wasn't the image itself. The worst part was that the photo wasn't mine. That moment, that memory, didn't belong to me. I sat on the couch, the photograph in my hand, feeling the heat drain from my body. At first, I tried to find a logical explanation. A friend from college. A work trip? A joke? But there was something about the way he looked at her. Something I knew all too well. That look was mine. Or at least, it had been. I put the photo in the drawer of my nightstand, like someone locking away poison. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask. That night, Andres arrived late. He carried the familiar scent of his perfume, mixed with something I couldn't identify. He absent-mindedly kissed my forehead, like someone touching something they no longer care much about. They say the truth hurts, but no one warns you that what truly destroys is doubt. That night we slept back to back, and while he breathed calmly, I looked at the ceiling, feeling that somehow my life had changed forever, and that photograph was just the first crack. There are silences that soothe, and silences that kill. Mine began to devour me from the inside. The days after finding the photograph were like walking on glass. I smiled, cooked, graded papers. But inside, every thought collided with the same image. Andres. That woman. And that smile that no longer belonged to me. I began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. How he now kept his phone face down. How he deleted notifications before I could even glance at it. How his laughter became shorter when I was near. It wasn't just suspicions. It was intuition. That muffled voice that screams inside you. That alarm that needs no proof to know something isn't right. I remember one night while he was showering, I was about to check his phone. I had the password. It was still our anniversary, but I didn't. And it wasn't out of respect or trust. It was out of fear. Fear of confirming what I already felt. Fear that my life would suddenly change. Because once you know, there's no going back. I started blaming myself. To think that maybe I had changed. That my days were too full of work, chores, shopping lists. And that maybe he was looking for something I no longer knew how to give him. That's the trap of betrayal. It makes you doubt yourself. Before you doubt the other person. One Friday, while I was making coffee, he received a call. He didn't answer, but I saw his face change, as if a window had opened inside him that I couldn't see. When he hung up, he told me it was from work. I just smiled and continued pouring the coffee. But inside, something broke a little more. In those days, I learned that silence weighs more than any truth. Because the truth hurts you, but silence slowly consumes you. That Saturday, Andres decided to invite some friends over for dinner. He said it as if it were something spontaneous. But I knew these get-togethers were always planned days in advance. I did the shopping, prepared dessert, and played soft music in the living room. Everything seemed normal. During dinner between toasts and anecdotes, I noticed something. Every time his phone vibrated on the table, he grabbed it too quickly, as if afraid someone else would see it. At one point, he got up to go to the kitchen, and that's when I saw him. A message flashed across the screen. I miss you. Tomorrow I'll count the hours. I didn't react. I didn't say anything. I smiled, poured wine, and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. But inside me, a cold wave began to rise from my stomach to my throat. That night, after the guests left, Andres stayed behind to clear the table while I took a shower. When I left, he was already in bed, his phone on the nightstand. He was sleeping on his side, breathing calmly. I stood in front of him, silent. I knew there was no turning back. I reached out, took the phone, and dialed the code, our anniversary. The screen lit up and the world shut down for me. The messages left no room for doubt. They weren't just flirtations. They were promises. Plans to escape to another country. Conversations where they talked about starting over, about not having to hide anymore. And the worst part were the photos. Selfies in cafes and hotels. And an image I immediately recognized. The same beach. The same sunset. The same smile from the photograph I found in that book. I closed the phone and stayed there, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep. I wondered how it was possible for someone to betray you so deeply, and yet sleep so peacefully by your side. That night I decided something. I wouldn't face him yet. First, I wanted to know how far he was willing to lie. The next day, while he was at work, I sat down at my computer. Anger had replaced fear. And anger, it gives you a strange clarity. I opened the photos I'd seen on his phone. I zoomed in on that beach, taking in every detail, the sign for a beach bar in the background, the logo on an umbrella, the shape of the mountains against the sky. I Googled everything, and in less than 10 minutes I found the exact spot. A beach 3 hours from our city. Then I went back to the messages. I memorized the name I'd saved her under, Lucia. There was no last name, but there were clues. She mentioned working at a bookstore. They were talking about a trip he canceled because his boss wouldn't give him permission. And in one photo, behind her, I could see a wall with the bookstore logo. I searched social media, Lucia plus bookstore name, and there she was. Her profile was open, smiling in photos, holding books, wearing the same blouse I saw in one of Andres's pictures. I logged into her account. There were no photos with him. No sign that she knew a married man. She seemed innocent. For a week, I watched her silently. I read her posts, her comments, even the dedications of the books she shared. And then I confirmed it. Lucia didn't know Andres was married. She wasn't my enemy. She was just another broken piece on the same board. I decided to contact her. But not directly. I created a fake profile, a fake woman, with photos stolen from the internet, a bookworm. I sent her a casual message, feigning interest in a book she had recommended. Little by little, between conversations, I managed to get closer. Until one afternoon, after exchanging several messages about poetry, I wrote her, "Lucia, I need to talk to you about Andres." She didn't respond immediately. But 15 minutes later, my phone vibrated. "Who are you and what do you want from him?" I smiled, even though my hands were shaking. I told her the truth. Or at least part of it. That Andres wasn't who she thought he was. That we needed to meet in person. That night, while Andres was showering, I received a text from her. "Tomorrow at 6 at the cafe on the corner from the bookstore." I knew that when I walked through that door, my life would change forever. I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe was half empty, and the aroma of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee hit me immediately. I sat by the window, overlooking the street, and ordered a tea. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed something to keep my hands busy. Lucia came in punctually. She was wearing a gray scarf and her hair was loose, with that same shine I'd seen in the photos. Her eyes scanned the room until they found me. For a moment, she hesitated, but then she walked over to my table. "Clara?" she asked in a faint voice. I nodded. She sat down opposite me. We didn't speak for the first few seconds. We just stared at each other, as if each was trying to size up the other. "I suppose you're—" She paused. "The wife." "Yes," I answered bluntly. "And I suppose you didn't know I was." She looked down, and that gesture told me everything. There was no hatred in her. There was surprise, disappointment, and something that felt too much like pain. "He told me he was divorced," she whispered. "That he lived alone." "He lied to you," I said without softening the word. She told me she'd met him a year ago, that they had traveled together, that they talked about moving south, that he promised her a new beginning. Every word she said was like a needle, but not against me, but against that version of Andres I thought I knew. "Lucia," I interrupted. "I don't want this to be a war between us." She looked up surprised. "What do you want then?" "I want the truth. And I want him to know that we know it." Her eyes changed. She stopped seeing me as the other side of the problem and started seeing me as someone who, like her, had been deceived. In that moment, a silent alliance was born. We made no promises. There were no handshakes. Just a tacit agreement. Andres wasn't going to see what was coming. Before leaving, Lucia looked at me intently and said, "Clara, he's not who you think he is. And I'm not just talking about infidelity." I wanted to ask her what that meant. But she was already leaving that phrase hanging in the air, like a threat or a warning. That night, I knew they hadn't just taken a marriage from me. They had taken the version of the story I thought I was living. There's no silence more intense than that before a storm. Lucia and I had chosen the place, a discreet cafe, but open enough that he couldn't simply turn around and escape. I arrived first. Lucia entered a few minutes later, wearing a black jacket and sunglasses, as if she wanted to erase any trace of herself. We didn't greet each other. There was no need to. That day, we were two women who had buried all differences. United by a common enemy, Andres thought he had an appointment with Lucia. She had written to him that she needed to see him urgently, that it was important. I was there like part of the furniture, until he walked through the door. I saw him enter. He had that confidence he always wore like an invisible suit. He was smiling, until his eyes fell on me. The smile died on his face, but he said nothing. He just looked at Lucia, and then at me, as if trying to decipher when his castle of lies had collapsed. "Sit down, Andres," I said in a voice even I didn't recognize. He did, but he didn't lean back in the chair. He was tense, like a cornered animal. Lucia spoke. "Are you going to tell us the truth? Or do you want us to?" He opened his mouth, but closed it immediately. He looked from one side to the other. He was sweating, even though it was cold. I took the photograph of the beach out of my bag and placed it on the table. I pushed it toward him without taking my eyes off his. He said nothing. He just lowered his gaze. And in that gesture, I understood that there was nothing left to save. There were no shouts. There were no insults. Just a brutal silence that crushed everything. He knew there was no escape. After a few endless seconds, I stood up. So did Lucia. We left him there alone, with the photograph in his hand, and the weight of his lies falling on him like an avalanche. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. It's enough for the traitor to drown in his own truth. I'd barely crossed the street after leaving the cafe when I heard his voice calling me. I didn't turn around, but he caught up with me. His breathing was labored. His jacket buttoned uncomfortably, his eyes wide as if he'd run faster than he could bear. "Clara, wait." I stopped. Not for him, but because I wanted to hear what kind of lie he planned to finish his masterpiece with. "It's not what it seems," he said. And that phrase, so worn out, made me smile bitterly. "Oh no?" I asked, in a tone so calm it didn't seem to belong to me. "Then explain what it is." He ran his hands through his hair, as if trying to gather his thoughts. He began to speak quickly, stringing together excuses as if he were trying to build a bridge over an abyss, that I wasn't listening to him anymore, that I had distanced myself, that Lucia made him feel alive again. I looked at him and realized something. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about need, about ego, about a void he tried to fill by stealing pieces of two women at the same time. "It's not about what she gives me," he continued. "It's about what you stopped giving me." His words fell like stones, but they no longer pierced me. Not because they didn't hurt, but because, for the first time, I understood they had no power over me. "Andres," I interrupted, "if you wanted something I couldn't give you, all you should have done was tell me. Not lie to me, not use me, not destroy what we built." He tried to get closer, but I took a step back. In that instant, I knew there was no turning back. That the man in front of me was no longer my husband. He was a stranger with the face of someone I once loved. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just left, because I understood that sometimes dignity is defended in silence. That night at home, I took out a suitcase. I packed only what was necessary. The photograph. I left it on the kitchen table, next to my wedding ring. I didn't leave a note. It wasn't necessary. 2 weeks had passed since I left home. I hadn't spoken to Andres again. Not a call. Not a text. And although the wound was still open, I was beginning to learn to breathe without it hurting so much. That afternoon, when I returned from teaching, I found an envelope under the door of my new apartment. There was no return address, just my name, written in small, neat handwriting. I recognized it instantly, Lucia. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there was a sheet of paper folded in two. I unfolded it and began to read. Clara, I've thought a lot about what we experienced and what we discovered together. I want to thank you for opening my eyes, even if it hurts. But I need you to know something else. Something I couldn't tell you that day in the cafe. I'm pregnant. I didn't know how to react at first. But now I'm clear. I'm not going to raise my child with a man who's incapable of telling the truth. I'm not looking for your approval, but I am looking for your understanding. And strange as it may sound, I hope that one day this child will be proof that even from the greatest pain, something pure can be born. I sat, holding the letter, feeling a mixture that was impossible to describe. Relief, because she wasn't going to continue with him. Sadness, because that baby in some way carried something of the history I had lost. I didn't feel anger toward Lucia. She was as much a victim as I was. But as I imagined that child, I thought of Andres's face, of the way his lies would become part of the life of someone who hadn't even been born yet. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer, not to forget her, but because I knew that one day, that yellowed leaf would be a reminder of who I was, and who I chose never to be again. That day I realized that sometimes endings aren't an explosion, but a whisper telling you it's time to start over. I moved to a city by the sea. It wasn't an escape. It was a choice. I wanted a place where every sunrise would remind me that there's always a new beginning, even after the longest nights. The first few days were strange. I slept in a small apartment, with bare walls and a closet that seemed too big for the few clothes I had left. But there was something liberating about that emptiness. There were no longer shadows lurking behind every door. I started walking on the beach every morning before going to teach at the local high school. The salty air cleansed more than just my lungs. It cleansed my mind. And little by little, I felt the voice I had silenced for years speak to me again. One Saturday afternoon, I took out my poetry notebook, the one I had abandoned when marriage swallowed me up with its routine. The words began to flow. Not about him, not about the betrayal, but about me. About the girl who dreamed of writing a book. About the woman who learned to love her scars. About the future that suddenly wasn't scary anymore. I made new friends. People who knew nothing about my past and who knew me as I am now, without the labels of wife of or victim of. I learned to enjoy my own company, to eat dinner alone without feeling lonely, to laugh without asking permission. One afternoon, while organizing my desk at school, I received a message from Lucia. It was a photo of her newborn baby, wrapped in a white blanket. Underneath, a single text. He's healthy and happy. Thank you. I smiled, because I understood that although our lives had been shattered by the same lie, we had both found a way to rebuild. Life didn't give me back what I lost, but it gave me something better, the certainty that I can lose everything and still flourish again. It was a quiet morning. The light streamed in through the window in golden hues, and on the table next to my coffee cup lay the notebook where I had written again after so long. I picked up a blank sheet of paper. I hadn't intended to do so, but the words came without asking permission. Dear Lucia, I don't know if this letter reaches you at a good or bad time. I only know that I needed to write to you. Not to talk about Andres, but to talk about us. Life crossed our paths in the worst of situations, in the midst of a lie that hurt us in different but profound ways. And yet, from all that pain, something was born that neither he nor his deceptions can erase. A shared truth. I saw your son's photo. He's beautiful. I want you to know that although his story began in a shadow, he doesn't have to carry it with him. You have the strength to raise someone who understands that love should never be built on a lie. I, too, am learning to live again. The sea has taught me that waves never stop, that they always crash back onto the shore, even if the tide washes them away. And that's how I feel, returning again and again, but different each time. I wish you a future where you don't have to distrust those who claim to love you. And I wish myself the same. Not all happy endings are together. Sometimes happiness is learning to walk alone and not being afraid to do so. With love, Clara. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope. I didn't know if I would send it or if it would remain, saved as just another page in my story. But when I finished it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Because I understood that forgiveness isn't always for the one who hurt you. Sometimes forgiveness is the gift you give yourself so you can live again.